Nick Davidson is a freelance writer based in the New Mexico high desert. After a master's in writing and publishing at Emerson College, Nick began his journalism journey as an intern, fact checker, and then online editor at Outside magazine. After his stint at Outside, he broke out of the office for a bit of wandering and a few far-flung adventures, landing in the wide-open, muddy terrain of freelancing. Emphasis on free. The chances and choices of the particular paths he took led him to a variety of work in fact-checking, research, web production, editing, radio storytelling, reporting, and writing. He has tended toward reporting stories that in some way funnel toward any of the many facets of an active outdoor lifestyle: adventure, environment, travel, science, gear, and movement in nature. But at heart, the stories he aims to share are ultimately centered on people and our complex relationship towards the world we inhabit, our ever-shifting understanding of that world, and the constant endeavor to find our place in it. Because there's an overabundance of pessimism, destruction, and despair, he always tells stories that, in the weighing of the scales, dip toward optimism, creative problem-solving, and inspiration. Nick is also a martial artist, a yogi of sorts, and a musician, all aspects of his life that have shaped him in his pursuit of good stories. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Okay, so Nick, to kick things off, tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
Yeah, so I typically call myself a storyteller primarily. I am a magazine journalist, is another way of putting it. I write most often about the outdoor space, outdoor lifestyle, and things and people and interesting works that overlap that space in some way. So, I've always been a very outdoorsy person, and I think a connection of nature is something that has definitely driven me toward this work. And kind of how I got here is, as with so many people and their vocations, is sort of unexpected and unintentional. I was a literature major in college and creative writing minor. And I happened to take one class that was basically a publishing class. And we worked on the university's literary journal. And in that process, I got really intrigued by the whole publishing industry. And at the time, I really, funnily enough, did not read much nonfiction. So I was really thinking a lot about fiction books and thought I might, be a book editor or possibly a writer. And I ended up going to Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts for a degree in publishing and writing. And in that process, I happened to take a magazine course, and really, I just realized that I loved the pace and versatility and excitement of the magazine world as opposed to book publishing. And I really got into nonfiction at that time. In one of those little twists of fate, I had an assignment to profile any magazine that I chose, and I happened to choose Outside Magazine. And I called a guy named Ryan Krogh, who at the time was the research editor there, and he headed up the internship, and I had a conversation with him, basically interviewing him about his work. And in the process of that conversation, we discovered that he had not only gone to Emerson College, but he had this teacher, this class, this assignment, and had done his assignment on Outside Magazine. And so we connected and basically said, once I graduate, give me a call. We'll see about an internship. And next thing I know, I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico as an intern at Outside Magazine, and everything kind of just flourished from there.
That's an amazing story. Wow, the stars really aligned for you.
Yeah, I really think it's those accidental, purposeful things are really kind of what make the individual journey spark and come alive.
Yeah, well, it's really amazing. And does Emerson know about this? Have they written about you in their alumni magazine?
They haven't. I probably mentioned it to my teacher because I think the editor that I spoke with said to say hi. But other than that, yeah, nobody really latched on to that story. I should probably let them know, though.
Yeah, well, maybe we should send them the PR Maven podcast and they can hear the
Yeah,
story.
maybe so. I'm sure they'd be intrigued. It's funny how many Emerson College connections I've made since then. So people do get around from there and tend to connect in various ways that I find intriguing.
Well, I know that Emerson College has an outstanding reputation in PR and marketing, so I wasn't as aware of their journalism school, but I imagine that it's very, very good.
Yeah, it is good, and it's interesting because they don't call it journalism school, although if you're in the magazine side of things, it tends to be essentially like journalism school, but it's really more about publishing, the business of publishing magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, you learn a bit about, say, feature writing or editing and kind of just how the process works. Although, again, as with many things, I think probably most of what I've learned about this business came after school, in the field doing the work. And it's a constant learning process. So it's been very interesting.
Right. Well, as a freelance writer, you need to always be marketing your work and selling your work. So, do you have a how-to tip for PR, marketing, social media, or personal branding?
I'm one of those strange people in this time who I am involved in social media. I have all the accounts and I have a bit of a presence there, but to me, I think my biggest piece of advice, if you want to call it that, is not really to worry so much about your social media following or about your branding or marketing in those sense. And I know that, it's probably blasphemy for a PR podcast, but what I think, I think it's all interconnected. What I tend to focus on is I don't really give my social media following much thought aside from its place as an aid for me to connect and share the work that I do and the work that other people do that I admire and think is important. So I think probably more essential and more useful than thinking about that following and branding to me is thinking about whether your work consistently lines up with this concept that the Japanese call your ikigai. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's essentially, the translation is essentially a reason for being. The French call it the raison d'etre, for example, your purpose. And it's really this Venn diagram of 4 circles, things that one circle is what you're good at. One circle is what you love. The third circle is what the world needs. And the fourth circle is what you can be paid for. And when those things overlap, you have your passion, you have your mission, your profession and vocation. And in the center of all of that, where everything overlaps, is the ikigai, the reason for being. And so for me, if you can kind of cut away all of the other dross and all the extraneous things that are more at the tip of that, like the number of followers you have, and if you hone in on your ikigai, your personal genius is another word for it. And if you do work that inhabits that, then I think your followers come naturally. They kind of come the way that moths tend to flutter to the brightest lights. At least they seem to do that at my house this time of year.
I love the concept of the ikigai.
Yeah, that's something that drives me. And I think really also the central purpose for me of my place as a storyteller is to connect, to unify. So really I'm kind of always inherently striving to do that, whether it's connecting people to other people, connecting a group of people to ideas, one idea to another idea, or maybe even something like connecting through story, one forest ecosystem to a desert plain, or all these things that in the process I'm grasping all of these seemingly disparate ideas and things and bringing them together and essentially bolstering unity through storytelling. So when I do that and when I do it well, I share it in whatever way I can, and I think people see that and they respond to it. And I should mention too that I don't have the most followers on Twitter. I don't have the most followers on Instagram. So I'm probably not the best person to ask how you gain a following. But I think if you hone in on that center of how do I do my best work and what is my purpose for being here and how do I share and connect, then I think that kind of happens naturally on its own. And it might trickle in, sometimes I get a few followers here and there, and sometimes I get a bunch all at once. And I haven't found the secret for it, but I just know what drives me, and it's kind of honing in on my central purpose.
Do editors expect you to be sharing your stories with your following when you publish a story in a certain publication?
Yeah, they do. We don't talk about it a lot, at least on a personal basis, but it is sort of generally understood that when a story comes out that I'll do my part to help share it and help spread it. And there's really no reason not to. I mean, again, that's my purpose for being here, is for doing this work, is to connect and share. So I'm going to do it regardless, but it's sort of funny that I've noticed lately, maybe even, I don't know, the last year, 2 years, I've been seeing in contracts that are set up for the work that I do that sometimes a publication will say, as a matter of this agreement, that I will share this story to my whatever my social media feeds are, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook I kind of use more personally, not quite as much in a professional sense. But so yeah, I've noticed that people are really asking for that a lot more lately, and I just kind of see that and think that it's interesting because again, I'm going to do it regardless, and then they'll do their part, and we do the best we can to reach the most people with a particular story and idea.
So how do you measure success? Or maybe you aren't even measuring success in PR, social media, and marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do measure success in my own internal way, and I don't really, and I'm not someone to pay attention too much to the numbers and the metrics of those things. Again, how many followers do you have? How many page views do you have? Those are less important to me than sort of what I was referring to earlier with the ikigai. It's, does your work line up with the things you care about? If it does, I feel like you're being successful, or you're on the journey, on the path to success. If at the end of the day, can you look back at your work and think that it was worthwhile and you would do it again, even if it wasn't always pleasant or easy, and it often isn't, then I think that that's success. And, Ray Bradbury is one of my favorite writers. He's a big influence on me. And one thing that he wrote, and he's said this in many talks too, he's always said that he wrote just for a lark. He claimed he never worked a day in his life. And I think that attitude is important to to the mindset of success, because really, what is success other than a mindset? Some people can measure it with numbers. There is a financial element to it. You have to be comfortable. You have to have your needs met. So to a certain extent, there's financial success. But to me, success is, that kind of cliche question of what would you be doing if money wasn't a factor? And do that thing. And if you can do it, and you can do it well, and get people to be interested in it, or moved by it, or inspired by it, then that's successful. So really, it's just about honing in on your personal genius. And I don't say that word in the sense of the kind of lone eccentric who stands above the rest and accomplishes great things, and we write history books about them. But I mean that in the sense of the word genius that another storyteller, Michael Meade, uses. He's a mythologist, storyteller, one of my favorite modern thinkers. And this phrase, personal genius, etymologically, if you trace the word genius back to its Latin roots, what it means is the attendant spirit that is present from one's birth. That's your innate ability, your natural inclinations. And you can hone in on that. It's very similar to the ikigai that I was talking about earlier. If you learn to find and inhabit your personal genius, and you live within that, and you do your work from that space, then you almost can't help but be successful. It's just a given. And again, I think it's important to define success on your own terms. Speaking as a freelance magazine journalist, it's not the most financially lucrative career, although you can definitely make a living on it, and you can make a good living doing that. But it's the sense of fulfilling that purpose that really drives you to success.
Well, I commend you, for following your own North Star and seeking a profession that gives you pleasure and joy. And I believe that if you're lucky enough to discover that thing, that ikigai, early on in your life, you're so much more blessed than, I feel really sorry for people that spend their whole career doing something that they hate. I know people who are like counting down the days until they retire. And it's, to me, it's like, oh my gosh, life is so short. And I think somehow this coronavirus has driven that home even more, that time is precious and life is short. And what a shame it is to work at something that you really don't derive joy from.
Yes, exactly. We, I think, are led to believe that, work for the sake of work for the sake of a paycheck so that you can pay rent is the purpose of life. And it really isn't. This is not to criticize anybody who does look forward to retirement, of course. But for me, I almost can't even really imagine retirement and what that might look like. And granted, I'm 36 years old, so I'm not anywhere near that. But I just envision doing what I do, regardless of, as long as I'm capable of doing it. I'm not counting down the days until I stop working, because it isn't work for me. It's my purpose, and there are ambitions involved with that. But for the most part, it's kind of just fulfilling some niche that you have found for yourself in the world. And if I can keep doing that, I'll keep doing it.
I am totally with you on that, Nick, because, for me, what I do is who I am. There's like no separation.
Exactly.
And
yeah, I try to set hours for myself in a vague sense. I'll when possible cut myself off from working at 6 p.m. and then I'll not work on the weekends. But even outside of those hours, I'm not something different. I'm still a storyteller. I'm still a writer, and I'm still taking in everything that I need to give me the tools to execute that work. So it's sort of always part of you. It's always with you.
I have a friend who's an author and a former magazine editor, and he calls himself a noticer. he just wherever he is, he's just noticing everything.
Mm-hmm. I identify with that definitely. Yeah, and I think that as a writer, I mean, this is a good life skill regardless. But as a writer, storyteller specifically, I think the most valuable skill you can learn to hone is observation, because that's how you distill life and the human condition and all of these things that we deal with into meaning. You have to be able to notice them. You have to be able to pay attention and listen, and you have to be able to connect some new idea that you encounter with some other older idea that's just been lurking and percolating in the compost of your being inside your mind, and connect them and create something that's, if not brand new, at least different and interesting, and then share it.
I think it's funny you said the compost of your mind, because I sometimes, you know how there's an expression to mull it over, but I always say I'm going to mulch it. It's like I'm just going to put it in the mulch pile and let it mulch.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Another of my favorite writers, Neil Gaiman, he talks about, and he's a fiction writer, and I do some of that creative writing too. He talks about when you're coming up with, a list of ideas or, little nuggets of things that you want to keep track of, but you don't know what they are yet. He calls them, you put it in the compost pile, put it on some file that you store away, and you just throw it on there, and then it does whatever it does in your mind or on that piece of paper. And at some point it becomes something else.
Well, do you use Evernote for those ideas, or where do you store those ideas away?
I don't. I'm not all of that. I'm good at organizing, but I don't really use a lot of specific apps and things. I really just have a file that is a Pages file on my Mac, and then I also have a backup version of it on Google Docs. So I just kind of, I just use a basic doc, like Microsoft Word kind of thing. And then I just have a lot of things that I just kind of spray onto that page and let it be there. And, a lot of it doesn't make much sense. I have to go back and reread everything. It's not particularly well organized, but for me, it does what it needs to do.
Well, a compost pile isn't necessarily organized either.
Right, exactly. It's just kind of all this muck thrown together.
Right.
You don't know how it works, but it works.
And then it turns into very rich soil.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So, Nick, content marketing is something that's becoming very prevalent in my world. But I am always, because I have worked in PR and worked with journalists for my entire career, which has been a very long career, there is a difference definitely between content and storytelling in journalism. How would you explain the difference?
Yeah, for me, it's mostly semantics, and mostly it's how you view what you're doing, at least in the way that I think of it. When I think of content versus story, and again, this isn't a judgment on any work that anybody else does, but this is just for my own sake and how to view work that I do and intend to do. But for me, content just has this connotation of being filler, of filling a space that was once empty. And story, on the other hand, for me, has heart in it. Content fills boxes, that thing, those things might just blow away to dust and mean nothing. And stories might be more impactful work that inspires people, that connects people. And it's not that one kind of work is always content and one kind of work is always storytelling. For example, I think you can do really good content work that is typically referred to as content work. You can do it really well in a way that does inspire, and you can do it in a way that, if nothing else, entertains and informs people, and those are worthwhile goals too. And at the same time, you can you can get stuck, I think, in focusing on, if you think of the work you do as content, I think you can get stuck in focusing on creating things that fill a void that isn't actually even there. What I think of as content is there's a space and a page, maybe it's a digital page, maybe it's a print page in a magazine. The publication just wants some words smattered on that page so that next to it, an advertiser can, present something to the readers that they see and then purchase something. And that's all fine. That's part of economics. It's part of how this world goes, but it's not what is meaningful to me. And I think, the advertisement is really irrelevant for me. If I'm going to put my energy into something, I'm going to make it good if I can, and I'm going to make it my version of good. And I'm going to put that heart into it and that spirit into it so that even if there is an ad next to it, somebody will still see what I've done and get something out of it. It isn't just filling a space. So that's kind of my take on it. You could say it's not so much a criticism of, say, the listicle, which I've done my share of in years past. It's just that when you are looking overall at the work that you do and the impact that you're going to make, you need to take into consideration how those things match up. Once again, going back to the ikigai, the personal genius. How does that fit in? And when it fits in, I call it story. And when it doesn't, I call it content. And that's sort of, in a nutshell, what I think it is.
Well, I think another difference between content and journalistic stories, something that's journalistic has been verified and is balanced and presumably fact-checked and is true. Whereas I think content doesn't necessarily have to be journalistic in nature.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's just its own category. Content can be someone's just fun little perspective on the 10 best hikes in New Zealand, which is something that I've done.
I love New Zealand.
Yeah. It's a beautiful place. And I happened to go there, and that's why that list of 10 hikes came out of that. But with the content version of freelance magazine work, you don't, these days, honestly, even as a travel writer, sometimes you don't need to go to a place. And that always feels a little bit weird to me, a little bit questionable, suggesting that people do things that you yourself have never done. But it is still accomplishing the goal that it's meant to accomplish, which is just to give people some ideas about ways to see the world, ways to have fun, restaurants to eat at. Like it's all good stuff. It's fine. It just doesn't necessarily have heart in it, and that's the distinction. It doesn't need to be, as you said, verified. It doesn't need, you don't need to report on it. Really, it's just you're kind of just the filter through which other people might enjoy the world.
Well, Nick, we're going to take a short break now and then come back and talk more about this. But first, I just want to talk about my new book, which is called Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand. I self-published it actually on Amazon.com, and it's all about building a network and growing a personal brand or an organizational brand. And it includes some stories from my long career in public relations and infographics. So I guess it has content in it. But so that's available on Amazon.com. And we're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back with more from Nick Davidson.
Do you want to grow your client or customer base? Perhaps increase brand awareness? Maybe tell your unique story more effectively? Of course you do. But you may be worried that you don't have enough expertise to make that happen. Well, no worries, PR Maven Nation. Let the PR Maven herself, Nancy Marshall, show you how easy it is to get your message across effectively using a powerful yet simple tool, a message map. Nancy's training is often called informative and constructive, well-designed and impactful, with a perfect blend of theory and real-life experience. You will leverage Nancy's expertise to create your own message map when you register for this comprehensive online video training course, which is broken down into 4 easy-to-understand modules. Normally, this course is priced at $147, but for listeners of the PR Maven podcast, that's you, PR Maven Nation, it's only $29 when you enter the code word podcast during enrollment. It even includes a workbook and bonus content to guide you through the process. So go to prmaven.com and click on the Message Map Mastery course to enroll today. Remember, enter the word podcast during enrollment for a special discounted price of $29.
So welcome back. Today we're talking with Nick Davidson, who's a freelance journalist, an outdoor writer, a storyteller, and we're going to dive right back in. So Nick, how does risk-taking and learning from failure help propel your career?
Yeah, taking risks, it's essential, especially as a freelance writer. I mean, most of the time, in fact, you're doing a certain amount of work, putting a certain amount of energy into a story before you have any idea whether it will amount to a published piece. So given that, you're going to fail, and I mean, countless times I've pursued stories and pitched them to everyone I can think of, and nothing came of it. And a lot of times, I think for me, I learn from that a number of things, but one might be, okay, what did I do incorrectly? Or, how could I pitch that better? How could I find a different angle on that? And in the process, what I've found a lot of times is that, I think if I am interested enough in a story to put a certain amount of effort into it and a certain amount of time, there's no way that I'm the only person intrigued by this story or inspired by the person at the center of the story. So if I have not landed my pitches well, then what I need to think of is, did I come at this with the right angle? How could I improve the pitch? And also, am I even reaching out to the right publications? So a lot of times those little failures can help you kind of hone in on how to present a story concisely, how to find the right place for your story. And really, I mean, given all of this stuff, given the inevitability of failure and the inevitability of success if you stick with it, I think you need to go after stories that you believe in, even when the uncertainty of that story reigns supreme. And maybe even especially then, as long as you are passionate about it. So, and a lot of times I've done this, and it hasn't always panned out, but sometimes it has. Is you don't necessarily wait for permission. You don't ask for permission to tell a story. You don't wait for an official assignment, and sometimes you should. But for example, last year I had met the mayor of Estes Park, Colorado, and he was doing a cool project, which I won't get into too much. But basically, he was building a motorcycle, and he was trying to set a speed record on the Bonneville Salt Flats. So I didn't really know how to. I tried pitching that story before I left, and it didn't really land. But I thought, what the heck, I'm gonna go for it anyway. And so I went on that reporting trip, and I ended up being the only crew member of his speed record attempt, which was just kind of a surreal position to be in. And nothing came of it so far anyway. Nothing amounted to a published story, but it gave me an interesting experience. And a lot of times when you've reported something that hasn't gone anywhere, you still have that lurking in the background. And again, it's like those old ideas, those old experiences that are composting in the background, that might come up and it might spring up into something new further down the road. So I guess, the point is it won't always work, but at the same time, nothing is ever going to work if you don't take a risk, if you're always waiting for permission, because it can feel, in the freelance magazine world, it can feel like editors, consciously or not, are gatekeepers. And more often than not, they're trying to keep you out. And I don't mean that literally, because often, of course, they're inviting you in and you can do good work and establish good relationships with publications. But if you're always waiting for that permission, I think you're not going to do the big things that you might have ambitions to do. And everybody's ambitions are different. For me, if I want to tell a big story and nobody's biting, then I might think to myself, well, I just have to go see for myself. I have to see what's happening and then find out the story. And then I actually know what to do with it. Whereas before I didn't know what to do with it. So yeah, there's a lot more I could say about that, but I just think it's important to take risks and learn from your failures and just hone in on those skills that will set you up to actually succeed.
Yeah, I think sometimes we learn more from our failures than from our successes.
For sure. Yeah, it's important. It's succeeding. Sometimes you can't really see why you've succeeded. Nobody's telling you this works because of this. Sometimes they just say yes, and that's it. But if they say no, a lot of times at least I feel more inspired, if nothing else, to figure out why no. And that can lead to better, in the case of my profession, better reporting, better story finding, and just honing in on those things that work because you know what didn't work.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of successful people or successes in life, most successful people have a network of fans and followers, either online or in person or both. How have you built your network of fans and followers, and has it been a conscious goal or has it happened on its own?
It's just happened on its own. As I was talking about earlier with social media, for example, I really have always just focused on sharing my work and sharing other people's work that I believe in. And kind of, for me, I've really kind of cultivated what I think is a sense of positivity. I like to be someone who sheds a light in this world that can seem to be full of darkness, but really isn't. And there's a lot of dark stories out there, and there are things that we shouldn't turn from. But for me, I've honed in on the things that uplift, because I want to be uplifted and I want to uplift others. And so, maybe that kind of tone that I communicate, I think, draws in a certain kind of person and I think we all crave it. So it hasn't really been conscious in a sense that I've set out a plan on how to find more followers and who to reach. I've really just done what I've done. I've done what I believe in. I've done what feels right to me, followed my intuitions. And I think, a certain number of people have seen that and decided to see what I'm all about.
Well, is there a certain book or a website or an app that you have found helpful in your career, and why is that?
Oh, yes. So this really only applies to freelance writers and, maybe editors too. But there is a group called UPod Academy, and UPod is an acronym that stands for Under Promise, Over Deliver. And it's sort of the mindset of this group. And it's a freelance group started by a guy named David Hochman, who is in his own right a very successful journalist, also a writing coach, and just a super smart guy. And this group has, in the last couple of years, transitioned to a Facebook group. And I think anybody can join it, but you have to be invited. You have to be kind of part of the freelance world in some sense. But it's just this vast network of other freelancers sharing their stories, asking questions, and there are people all over the board in terms of experience. Some people who are just starting out after college saying, help me, I have no idea what to do. How do I do this thing? And then the people who have been doing this for 20, 30 years saying, well, here's what I know, and everyone in between. And so it's a great resource for getting advice on how to report, or finding sources, finding editor contacts. And David Hochman, the leader of this group, also hosts, sometimes there are webinars, but he hosts in person at his home in Los Angeles, seminars that are devoted to some specific topic. And then he'll bring in, editors from, say, New York Magazine or Los Angeles Times Magazine, or, all these big publications, and help writers connect with editors, which is really a hugely important thing. And just kind of say, like, how do we do this? Or talk to other successful writers like Tom Juneau, who has done a lot of writing for Esquire and I think maybe the Atlantic now. But anyway, it's just probably for me has been the most helpful resource, because connecting with other people who have the expertise that you don't have yet, and being able to offer your own expertise is just invaluable. That's been probably the biggest thing. One other thing real quick that I'll say has been helpful to me is one particular app called Tape-A-Call Pro. And as a reporter, it's been infinitely helpful to me to record interviews that I do on my phone. And it's very simple, but it's something that I use more than anything else at this point.
So Tape-A-Call, how do you spell that?
Tape-A-Call. So it's tape a call.
Tape-A-Call. I see. Okay.
Tape-A-Call. Yeah.
That was like Tape-A-Call, kind of like topical, but with an A. Yeah, that sounds really useful to tape interviews, and that kind of probably goes into your compost pile also.
Yeah, definitely.
This has been really interesting. I'm sure that people will want to connect with you. So can they connect with you on LinkedIn or Twitter, or where would you like them to follow up?
Yeah, really, any of those places. LinkedIn, just my name, Nick Davidson, freelance journalist, I think is what it says I am. On Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Nick G as in George Davidson, Nick G Davidson. And also probably another great way to just see some examples of what I do and connect with me is through my website, which is nickgdavidson.com.
Cool. Well, this has been really interesting, and I find you to be a very inspirational person who really lives according to your values. So I admire that very much. And I haven't met you in person yet, but I hope someday to be able to meet you in person, because I always think that's where the magic really happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope we get to do that. And I really appreciate you having me on this podcast, Nancy. And so thanks for talking.
Thanks, Nick. And I hope everyone in PR Maven Nation has a great day. That's it for this week's episode. I'd like to thank you for listening, and if you feel that you've gotten value out of today's conversation, consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes or whatever app you're using to tune in. If you haven't subscribed yet, you should do so. I release a new episode each week, and subscribing will make sure you get an alert when there's a new episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation by going to prmaven.com/nation and clicking join. It's free, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you have an Alexa-enabled device, be sure to add the PR Maven Marketing Minute to your daily flash briefing menu. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.